tells me I can get long-winded, so here's hoping for some brevity today, as I know there are others up here who need to share important information as well. If you read through my biography, you would have seen that we adopted 3 children. Our children have multiple special health care needs. Our boys both have autism. My oldest also has seizures and a genetic neutropenia condition. Our oldest autism is a regressive form. He met most of his milestones early, but then about the age of 5, he started regressing. His IQ dropped from 100 when he was in kindergarten down to 54 at the age of 7. He also has aggressive meltdowns lasting upwards of 45 minutes to an hour. Our youngest son was born without oxygen. Doctors would not speculate on his quality of life when I picked him up at the hospital upon discharge. Our daughter seemed to be more challenging. She began refusing to do homework, lying, backtalking, hitting, and destroying property. One time, she also tried to kick me down the stairs. My husband and I tried talking to her about that, and her response was, "I know I could hurt you. I wanted you dead." She also exhibited no empathy. When I discussed that with her psychiatric provider, she told me that was something we could not teach her. And that is when we knew we were dealing with so much more and started worrying about everyone's safety. Our 2 oldest children were placed on the SED waiver at the age of 4. In 2010, our oldest was transitioned to the IDD waiver after receiving his autism and IDD diagnosis and receiving approval for crisis funding for the IDD waiver from the CDDO. Our daughter had attendant care, respite services, case management, therapy services, and medication management services, all available community services through the SED waiver. However, our daughter's behavior just continued to worsen. In early June of 2012, we found ourselves admitting our daughter for the first hospitalization of the summer. Upon discharge, the social worker recommended to her father and I that we begin looking for longer-term residential treatment. I spoke with our community mental health center, but they told me we needed multiple hospitalizations to be considered for a PRTF admission. So even with the recommendation from the hospital, we weren't able to proceed. After returning from a camp that our 2 oldest went to for kids with special health care needs and their siblings, we attempted to have her admitted to the hospital once again due to her refusing to listen to me and running around the mall without regard for anyone else. I had absolutely no control. I ended up having to call the police. She had no respect for any type of authority, and the police were no different. She refused to even listen to them at this point. After several minutes, she finally did start walking out to the parking lot, but once there, she ran off, not bothering to look for cars and running between them, even with the police running behind her. After being taken to our community health crisis center, she was ultimately admitted to a different hospital. Upon discharge from this hospital, they also recommended that we look at longer-term residential treatment. I once again went back to our community mental health center. My husband and I at this point were extremely stressed and exhausted. We were on high alert at all times. This time we were able to start the PRTF process. We had our initial meeting, and honestly, I wasn't hopeful. I kept talking about additional community supports that could be added. It seemed like we had everything possible and nothing was working. Her dad and I were stressed. It was affecting our other kids. We were constantly on edge that she would make allegations that something had been done to her that were not true, but it would be believed, and DCF would come in and take all 3 children away. Our boys didn't deserve that. We had already had a couple incidences of false allegations. Before our meeting for the decision, I had to call the police once again. We were at the store and she refused to go in, and once again she was running around in a store parking lot. They took her to the community mental health center where we received the denial. for the admission. I immediately told them I wanted the appeal information because I was going to appeal their decision. When we got home, our daughter refused to go inside. She stood out in the middle of the street and refused to move. I called our community mental health center, told them what was going on, and they told me they would call, have attendant care come that evening so that I could have a break. After I was finally able to get her into the house, I called to file the appeal. They told me we'd have a response within 72 hours because they expedited the request. Later that evening, when our daughter left with the attendant care worker, we just relaxed as much as we could. When she returned, we told her it was time to go to bed. My husband and I were trying to relax and watch some TV, and then we heard a knock on the door. When we answered, there was a deputy sheriff and police officer standing on our doorstep. They asked if our daughter was there and asked to see her. I went and woke her up and told her she needed to come upstairs. When we came up, the police officer took her into a hallway and the sheriff talked to my husband and myself, and he told us the allegations. I began to hyperventilate. I was accused of choking her, and I couldn't believe it. I explained all that happened that day, all that we'd been experiencing, and that we were in the process of appealing a decision to admit her to a PRTF. After hearing from both of us, the deputy and the police officer went out to discuss what would happen. They came in and said nothing would happen further that evening, but that we should expect to receive a visit from DCF. After we continued to speak with them, our daughter went and sat under the dining room table. We tried to get her to come out and go back to bed, and she refused. And we tried this for several minutes, and she just refused to listen. It took the deputy finally telling us that he couldn't put his hands on her, but we could, for her to get out from under the table and go down to her room. We had a response to our appeal less than 36 hours after initiation. The appeal was approved for admission, and we had a bed at the end of the week, and she was admitted 3.5 hours away from our home. While there, she ran away from the facility many times, refused to go to school, had altercations with other residents, and made false allegations against staff. After 6 months, the facility closed their girls' unit, and she was moved to a facility closer to our home and stayed at that facility for 6 months. The same behaviors continued at that facility. Less than a week before her discharge, she stabbed another resident with a pencil. There's a lot more to this story, but that will have to be for another time. I'll just say that we had to make some very hard decisions that second 6 months. Long story short, she did not come home with us upon discharge. Our second PRTF experience was with our oldest son when he was 15 years old. He had started 9th grade in the fall of August 2016. Transitions were always tough for him. We had worked with his educational team and came up with what we thought was a good transition plan for moving him from middle school to high school. However, it proved not to be enough. He still had major struggles with the transition to high school. We were also having a lot of behaviors at home, and were doing everything we could to keep our routine the same, low-key and calm during the start of school. Our school district was doing everything they possibly could to try and help him maintain at school. Nothing seemed to work. They provided him with 2 paras. They provided him with a shortened school day. When those items didn't work, they moved him to a facility that the school had where it would just be him with a teacher and his 2 paras with the shortened school day, and he was still having a lot of difficulty. In March of 2017, we asked Parsons Dual Diagnosis team to come and do an evaluation of the school and at home to give us their thoughts as to what could be done differently. The Parsons Dual Diagnosis team believed everyone was doing everything they could to help him. In speaking with our special education administrators, my husband and I decided we needed to seek a PRTF admission for our son. Due to our son's IQ, we knew that there was only one PRTF facility in the state that he would be eligible for, and that it could take a while for admission. This facility was also about 3 hours from our home. In addition to seeking admission, our school district was going to seek placement at Heartspring, a private school for children with autism. Our son was admitted to Heartspring on the 1st of May, 2017. The second week our son was at Heartspring, we learned that our son was near the top of the list for PRTF and that we could receive a call for admission any day. We received that call on May 14th for admission on May 16th. He was there for 9 months and discharged January 2nd, 2018 and returned to Heartspring January 3rd as a day student. We had a much different experience with admission to this PRTF. I'm not sure if it's because our son was on the IDD waiver, because of the seriousness and severity of his behaviors, or what, but we were able to start the process immediately and get approved without having to appeal. Our difficulty didn't come until after discharge, and we went home and settled back into a routine. Because our son was on the IDD waiver upon his admission to the PRTF, I had assumed, and no one had said anything differently, that our son's waiver services went right back into place upon his return home. I had found new workers and had their applications processed and approved before his discharge. Our workers started working immediately and things were going well. He was connecting with the workers. This continued for 2 weeks until I received a call from our financial management service provider and was told that his waiver was not in place and he had no services. His workers could not come back until we got this resolved. We had learned that his waiver had been closed because he had been inpatient for so long. He was there for 9 months. We had to work with the CDDO and his targeted case manager to immediately get a crisis exception filed. Then after speaking with individuals at KDADS, they were able to get his paperwork approved within a couple of weeks so we could get his workers back to help us. This 2-week disruption in services totally upended our son's routine. His behavior regressed and his aggression increased tenfold. At Heartspring, he was starting to have more restraints and seclusions. The restraints and seclusions lasted as long as 45 to 60 minutes or more. In several of the incidences, there were 10 to 12 staff involved in the restraints and seclusions. After a couple months, receiving numerous reports of the increased restraints and seclusions and seeing how much the intensity had increased, I was contacted by the special education administrator from our school district and was asked to speak with my husband about considering transitioning our son to a residential student at Heartspring. The administrator was concerned about our safety if our son was to escalate to the extent he did at the school and our inability to keep us or our younger son safe. My husband and I discussed it and we ultimately decided that we needed to make the decision to have him transition to residential. He transitioned to being a residential student on May 5th, 2018. He stayed there until May 8th, 2023 and was discharged with no notice. After a 10-month gatekeeping application and appeal journey, a lot of meetings with his MCO, our CDDO, KDADS, lots of emails to senators and representatives, both federal and state, and hitting brick walls every turn we made, we finally received a call less than 24 hours after he was immediately discharged from Heartspring that our son was approved for Parsons State Hospital. Again, that story is for another day. I hope my story about our experiences with PRTFs will help you to understand how the experiences affected our family, and I'm happy to answer any questions.